The road to Withers Hollow curved like a question mark through forests that felt too quiet. The air smelled of wet bark and fog, and the willow trees leaned in, almost conspiratorially, as Lena and Mark drove past. The village was small, almost too small to appear on a proper map. Just 30 houses, a chapel, a square, and a lingering mist that never seemed to lift, even at noon. They had come to escape. Lena needed stillness after her miscarriage. Mark needed a place where he could finish his second book without the thrum of city life. When they saw the listing for the stone cottage at the edge of the hollow, they thought it was fate. It had a mossy roof, a wide fireplace, and a backyard full of hanging willow trees, hundreds of them, as though the house had been swallowed by a forest of sighing green. The villagers were polite, if distant. They spoke in slow, clipped syllables, eyes flicking from the couple to the trees and back again. "You'll find it peaceful here," said one wrinkled man at the market. "The willows keep the quiet in." Lena smiled and nodded, not understanding, thinking it was some rural poetry she wasn't meant to unpack. The cottage was charming but overgrown. Ivy curled across the shutters and worms filled the flower beds. And there was a willow tree, particularly large and bent, that pressed right up against the bedroom window. At night, its branches scratched at the glass in a slow, steady rhythm, like fingers trying to get in. On the third day, Mark left for a trip back to the city to retrieve more supplies. Lena stayed behind with the birdsong, the bookshelves, and the perpetual whisper of the wind through willow leaves. By mid-afternoon, she'd had enough of the scraping. She found an old saw in the shed and marched into the backyard, sleeves rolled up, jaw set. She stood beneath the drooping limbs of the tree that leaned too close and whispered too loud. It took longer than she expected. The bark was thick and unusually pale. When she cut into it, the sap that oozed out was milky white and smelled faintly of honey and rot. She gagged but kept sawing. Every pull of the blade made a low groan, not mechanical, but almost organic, like a voice trying to speak. When the tree finally fell, it landed with a soft thump, like a body on wet soil. That night, as Lena lay alone in bed, the wind fell still. But something else took its place. From beyond the broken stump and the window pane came a sound she couldn't place at first, soft, high-pitched, and constant. It took several minutes for her to realize what it was. Crying. She turned on the lamp. The room was empty. But the crying didn't stop. At sunrise, a knock came. Not from the front door. From the back window. Lena stepped into the kitchen and froze. An old woman stood outside. Her eyes were dark as bark, her face folded into deep, unnatural creases. Her long, thin hair was woven with willow strands, and her dress hung like dried vines. Lena stared, heart pounding. "You cut her down," the woman said without moving her lips. "She knew you would." "I didn't mean to," Lena stammered, opening the door halfway. It was sick. It was leaning into the window. I didn't know. The woman's eyes never blinked. The pact was broken. You must leave. Or you must replace her. What does that mean? But the woman had already turned and vanished into the mist that rose from the yard like breath from a sleeping mouth. When Mark returned, she tried to explain. He didn't believe her at first, thought it was a dream, or guilt, or loneliness playing tricks. But when he went to bury the stump, something changed. She found him in the garden, pale and shaking. He'd been digging and found something under the roots. Bones. They were small. Thin. A rib cage. A shattered skull. Finger bones, curled in a fetal shape and wrapped in gnarled roots. The roots had grown through them, pierced them, cradled them like a womb of bark. Neither of them slept that night. Whispers began in the floorboards, in the window panes, in the windless dark. Replace her, they said. Blood remembers. On the seventh night, the village summoned them. They were brought into a stone hall, where 9 elders waited, draped in black willow robes, each older than the last. There were no greetings, no formalities. You were not taught our ways, said the man in the center. But you must still abide. The willow is sacred, said another. It takes. It gives. It remembers. The tree you felled was not a tree. It was a vow. Lena tried to ask what it meant to replace it. The elders did not answer. The old woman who had come to her window stepped forward. From the folds of her robe, she produced a wooden bowl filled with thick white sap. Floating inside was a single black seed, no larger than a beetle. You may leave this place, the woman said. Or you may stay and plant this. Lena stared at the seed. What happens if I leave? She asked. No one answered. Mark took her hand. Let's go. We can leave tonight. Whatever this is, we don't owe anyone anything. But as they turned, the woman's voice rang out. You were chosen by the willow. It let you enter. It let you stay. Now it calls for your roots. That night, Lena couldn't sleep. The wind had returned, louder now, less like wind and more like a language. It spoke in her dreams. She saw herself under the soil, arms spread wide, roots bursting from her fingertips. She saw dozens of others in the dark, women, mostly, bound in bark and bone, their hair growing like vines into the canopy above. She woke, breathless, covered in soil she didn't remember touching. By morning, Mark was gone. All that remained in their bed was a smear of sap and a single willow leaf. Lena walked barefoot into the backyard. The stump had vanished. In its place was a hollow in the earth, freshly dug. Waiting. She carried the bowl. She knelt. She planted the seed. And then, very slowly, she lay down next to it. The soil pulled her in like water. A week later, a new tree had grown in the yard. Pale, with long weeping limbs. Taller than the others. Its leaves trembled in still air, whispering her name. The cottage listing went back up 2 months later. Perfect for writers. Quiet, private. Surrounded by nature. The trees are sacred, the fine print read. Do not cut the willows. 3 months passed after Lena vanished. The village of Withers Hollow didn't speak of it. Not aloud. But the trees knew. They always did. The new willow behind the cottage grew fast, unnaturally so. By the first frost, it had already dwarfed the others, its limbs long and trembling even when the wind was still. Its bark remained pale and slick with a faint sheen, as though it never fully dried. Villagers who passed by would bow their heads without knowing why. Some dropped herbs at its base. Others whispered prayers to no god they could name. The elders, of course, said nothing. Only the oldest among them, those who had lived through previous replantings, understood the quiet sorrow that came with a fresh tree. It meant balance had returned. For now. The cottage stayed empty. It was better that way. But eventually, time, like ivy, crept back in. On the edge of spring, a man named David Kettering, photographer, recently divorced, seeking peace, found the listing for the Lockridge cottage online. It promised silence, nature, and inspiration. He arrived in the village just as the last snow melted. The trees were waking. They welcomed him quietly. He was friendly, polite, eager to be left alone. The villagers watched with heavy eyes but made no move to intervene. Some pacts, after all, were not for them to challenge. The key was left for him under the mat, just as the posting had promised. On his first evening, David walked the garden path behind the house and marveled at the towering willow in the back. Its branches curled like fingers reaching down from the sky, almost touching the soil. He stared at it for a long time, then took a photo. But when he checked the image, the tree wasn't there. Only mist. He chalked it up to fog. Or a malfunction. Later that night, as he unpacked boxes in the kitchen, he heard something brushing the window. He froze, listening. A gentle scraping, like thin nails on glass. He turned off the music. The noise continued. He approached the window slowly. And saw a single branch, thin, pale, and long, pressed lightly against the pane. He smiled. Creepy old tree, he muttered, and pulled the curtain shut. He didn't see the face reflected faintly in the glass. Didn't notice the fog thickening just beyond the yard, curling like breath through the soil. Didn't hear the whisper of the leaves. You came back.